Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You're tuning into an episode of the Redefining Society Podcast, hosted by Marco Ciappelli. Let's face it, the future is now. We live in a hybrid analog-digital society, and we must stop ignoring it or pretending that technology is not affecting us. The line between the physical and virtual worlds has become a figment of our imagination. On it, we are continually performing a dangerous balancing act, juggling convenience, privacy, freedom, security, technology, society, culture, and even the future of humanity. There is no better place than here, and no better time than now, to muse on our relationship with technology and how to redefine what society means in this new age.
Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high-net-worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io. BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com. Devo unlocks the full value of machine data for the world's most instrumented enterprises. The Devo Data Analytics Platform addresses the explosion in volume of machine data and the crushing demands of algorithms and automation. Learn more at devo.com.
Hello, this is Marco Ciappelli. Welcome to another episode of Redefining Society Podcast. And this is where, as you know, we muse and reflect on technology and the way that we interact with it. So it's either you can think about society and technology or technology and society. I don't care. It's the same thing. We meet in the middle. But I think that if I have to start with one side, I will start with society. I'll give it a little bit more of the relevance when we have this conversation. And eventually, we meet in the middle. Today, I'm actually really excited because we're going to talk about a book called Ethics for People Who Work in Tech. And we're going to do that with the author, Marc Steen, all the way from Europe. And I'm here all the way in LA. So this is just an audio podcast. So in order to prove that Marc is real and is here with me, we're gonna have him introduce himself and say hello to everybody. And I'm sure it's gonna be a fantastic conversation in line with Redefining Society. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks for the invitation, Marco. My name is Marc Steen. I live and work in the Netherlands. I work as a senior research scientist at TNO, which is a large, independent, government-funded research and technology organization in the Netherlands. And for the last 10 years or so, I've increasingly specialized in asking questions about ethics involved in the creation, the development, and the deployment of technologies with a focus on digital technologies, big data, algorithms, and what they currently tend to call artificial intelligence, AI.
Do we agree on the intelligence? We want to start with that?
Yeah. Non-verbally, I was hinting like it's a silly term. I would rather say machines doing, calculations, and then we can use them as tools, and then they can do useful stuff or less useful stuff for us. So I regard technology always as tools. And even more, I look at them often from a perspective of ethics, where you can think of technology as tools that can either help people to live well together or hinder people to live well together. And it's not so black and white as that, but it enables a conversation on looking at technology always as tools, potentially for enhancing human capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And AI as a white plastic robot that does things and that thinks of its own. No, it's nice for science fiction movies, but it's not very realistic.
Okay, we're not gonna hear that. That voice, the metallic voice in the back, telling that Dave, can do that. So I like to start with the idea of intelligence, because I feel like you set up the expectations so high when you talk about intelligence. I think a lot of people don't even know how to define intelligence in general when it applies to humans and or animals, right? Are they intelligent? They're intelligent in a different way. So to attribute that to a machine, yeah, great, but it seems a little too much in terms of expecting, and then it's easy to say, well, not really that intelligent. So I would like to know, first of all, let's start with, why did you feel the need to write this book? I'm assuming based on your experience in working in technology for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I've worked for 25 years by now in various roles. First as a designer, as a researcher, as a project manager, always in, as I mentioned, like digital technologies, virtual communities, applications, algorithms, really a host of very various projects. And increasingly, I was focusing on ethical aspects. You can think of privacy, but obviously also other topics like fairness or human autonomy. And then my coworkers and partners and clients were often then, when they knew that I was like the ethics person or an ethics person, hey, Mark, can you help us with this project? Can you see whether it is ethical or not? And then quickly I found out that's not a very fruitful path for me, like me judging them whether they're ethical or not. It's a silly task. I don't do that. So rather I presented ethics as a process that they go through, either implicitly, but rather I would prefer explicitly. So I help them with a vocabulary, a framework for taking into account ethical aspects in development and deployment of technologies. So the need was really there. Many professionals, if I give lectures or talks, ethics is important in your projects. Well, all the hands go up. And a second question: who of you thinks that it is easy to take into account, to integrate ethics in your project? Well, all the hands go down. So yeah, this is like the gap where my book steps in. There are other books, more academic ones. Mine, I think, and that's also from the reviews, is rather accessible. I try to explain 4 major ethical perspectives in a practical manner. Lots of examples. It's helpful for people who work in tech, who want to but don't know how exactly to. It's a very practical book.
Yeah, and I want to go definitely, as we keep the conversation going, into some examples, the steps, the tips that you give in order to follow this method. But I want to hold a little bit into this process of people that work in tech. They want to be ethical, but most of the time they don't know how to apply. And I'm not saying that they're not ethical people. I mean, I'm hoping we're all somehow and somewhat ethical. But do you think that what they call, the liberal art or the social science, like sociology, philosophy, political science, and so forth, should be maybe at this time implemented into the education of technologists or people that work in tech, so that maybe they do have some base fundamental to go do their job in this world where technology is not just technology in a silos?
Yeah, I would certainly recommend people who are educated to become computer scientists, data scientists, software engineers, programmers, project managers. This whole group of people who help to create this digital world, digital applications. If they learn more about ethics and also other topics you mentioned, like sociology, even political science. I mean, it's helpful if you have just a broader view on it. And then, as I mentioned, I live and work in the Netherlands, and we have 4 large universities of technology. That's Delft, Eindhoven, Twente, and Wageningen. And all of them have in their second year a course that is obligatory for all, applied ethics. So from where I come from, it's normal to have that as part of the education. But I've heard that it's not so
No.
in all other countries.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you, because I'm sure it's different countries, they probably prepare their academic curriculum in a different way. But I feel also that nowadays, with all these changes, I think that many education system, they are, at least I hope, they are adapting to it. And I mean, it's definitely needed. I always joke that nowadays people that are that have studied philosophy, that they in the past, even when I graduated many years ago, it was kind of like, why do you study that? Right. And I would be like, yeah, well, maybe I'll go teaching them, maybe I'll be using it in communicating with people, advertising like I did. But nobody thought like, oh, I'm going to go and use it in computer science. And now we do.
Indeed, it's increasingly necessary. The technologies like social media are so ubiquitous, and they have such enormous impacts. They they can enable people to skew and rig elections. These implications are huge and real. So social science is needed to understand those processes. Ethics is needed, political science. And I think that there's increasingly, and also to come back to your question, I'm not aware of all the other countries and their curricula and their universities of technologies, but I would guess the Netherlands is not alone in this. There must be many other countries increasingly implementing ethics in their core courses.
Right. But let's talk about your book. So you say you have many examples, you have a system that I'm sure it will help both people that do have a certain background in social science, because it's never enough. Certainly not a science that is exact, like maybe other kind of science. And how did you approach that? So how do you introduce even the topic of ethics to people?
Yeah, that's a nice question. I do two things. The first thing is I describe ethics and I present ethics as a process. So the anecdote that I just told, like, hey, Mark, can you help us make our project more ethical? That's like you see ethics also maybe as a checkbox, or as a checklist, or as a rubber stamp that you need to proceed, or as a roadblock that you must cross, and then the innovation can continue. And instead of that, I present a metaphor of the steering wheel. So imagine your project as a vehicle, and then you want your vehicle, your project, to go safely from A to B and not hit the side of the road, not hit trees, stay on your side of the road, no accidents, take the correct off-ramp. And that's how you can use ethics as a steering wheel to keep your project on track and not have it derail or have a collision or crashes. And secondly, and that's a bit more abstract, it's not a real metaphor, but as a process, which means this also has to do with my background in industrial design engineering in Delft, which approaches design and innovation very much like a process that you can facilitate, to some extent manage it, but coordinate and facilitate for sure. And then it's an iterative process that I'm proposing. Like, first, you put your project on the table, you look at it, you imagine, you envision the outputs, what you want to achieve in the world, and then you identify issues. That's step one. What could go wrong or what could go horribly well? I mean, that's also something. I gave the example of social media. Now, everybody all the time, everywhere is using social media. So it's like, that can also go wrong or have implications. So that's step one, identify issues or risks or things that you want to look at. Secondly, organize conversations, dialogues about these, first with the project team, but also with a potential user or somebody who who will experience the effects of it. If it is an algorithm that aims to detect fraud, you can invite a person who has been pointed at as being committing fraud, but then, for example, it was a false positive. So that person, in fact, didn't commit fraud. So that's very useful to hear such a person's experiences with. So were you able to complain? Were you able to correct? Were you able to look into the algorithm, how it came to this wrong conclusion? Thirdly, and that's also an important step, is and that's the opposite of the philosopher sitting in their armchair. It's do something, keep your project going, make a decision, either design option A or design option B, or this feature or that feature, and then importantly, do some kind of experiment or monitoring that enables you to evaluate. So issues, conversations, and action. That's, I think, is a iterative process that you can repeat every 3 months, 3 weeks, depending on the way that you organize your projects.
Right. I like the idea of keeping it alive because things change, right? I mean, it's not something that, something you may think it was ethical 20, 30, 50 years ago. It may certainly not be considered ethical today. Society evolve, change, sometimes go a little bit backward, we see that. Sometimes it keeps moving forward. And I think that what we really need to pay attention, and I like to use this word when we have this conversation, is the unexpected consequences, right? Because you were using the example as like, Mark, can you come here and tell me if this is ethical? And you're like, well, that's a big question to put on one person responsibility, and it's more of a collective responsibility, I think, and keep the mind open and say, look, we do have biases, we do think in a certain way, and what may be ethical for you, maybe in another culture, may be unethical. So ethics, it's even the definition of it is not an easy one. So to keep it open like this, I think it's a great concept. But you said something before we start recording that I really like, the other approach of zooming in and zooming out. So I would love for you to talk about that approach.
Yeah, it's systems thinking is underlying the book that I wrote. There are various ways to do systems thinking. The way that I do it is rather practical. So if I find myself in a meeting, they've invited me to think with them, or I'm a project team member, and at the moment that all of us are talking about some detail in the algorithm, in the user interface, in the product, I can then ask a question that zooms out. Like, so let's imagine this algorithm being implemented, having effects in the real world, societal effects, effects on this example of this fraud detection, on a person's daily life. So then I zoom out. If everybody zoomed in, I zoom out. But I can also do this the other way around. Imagine there's same project, but a while later or a different meeting, they're talking about fairness and equality in rather abstract terms. I will then ask a question that says, hey, but what was this user interface again? This operator that gets a list of names, and there's a red flag for this person's name because the algorithm thinks that person was fraudulent. Has then this operator the ability to push back the algorithm, to not follow the orders of the algorithm, so to say, to not follow, but to question it, to push back. So then everybody zoomed out and I zoom in, and I think that's a nice way of showing the connections, systems thinking, you may say, between what you create on a micro scale and the macro effects, and the other way around, how macro effects hang together with seemingly details. But that can, for example, fairness, justice, equality, bias, this is like a term that often people use. But like you were saying, well, it's a weird analogy. You were saying like values are not static; they change. Yeah, sure. And also, if people talk about fairness or bias or equality, they may think of it as a snapshot in time, but there's always a time dimension. So what happens time-wise if I get this person calling me up, inquiring whether I did something fraudulent? How can I then time-wise react to that? Do I have the ability to respond, to correct, to question the algorithm? So that's procedures, not only the material justice. And yeah, that's something that I often do, to imagine how things happen over time, whether people have actual effective abilities to correct, to push back. If the algorithms doesn't go well, yeah, I'm just realizing that I often give examples of when the algorithm fails, because, well, these are more interesting examples than if the algorithm just does its job correctly.
Mm. So I wanna run by you something. Like, we started with artificial intelligence and the word intelligence. Also, artificial is kind of funny for me, but let's not go there. But intelligence, and I'm thinking, when we think about, again, generative AI, it's made by ingesting, harvesting all this information, and there are ethics in that process as well, from copyright to many other things. But in general, the way I think about it is, AI, it's ultimately human. Technology is human. Algorithm is human, because it's not just technology that comes from nowhere. It's the consequence of our thinking. And I want to be positive, where only few people maybe wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be evil. I'm going to do something really bad today. Sure, maybe there are the villains in the world, but in general, it's kind of like by mistake, by not thinking, because it's hard to think from zooming out, zooming in, putting yourself in a perspective, put it in another. So I think a system, it's necessary, but how solid is that system? I don't know. I'm just throwing this thought there for you to
Let me pick up on your proposition that most of us are not evil. I totally agree with that. Like in the first chapter or so of the book, I write, the assumption underlying the book is that most of us, all of us, have the ability, even the motivations to do good, to do well, to do good to others, to do good to the world. And then I have had reviews and responses to my book where people, and I think they had a good argument. Like, suppose that I read your book, I understood most of it, I now have a vocabulary, I now have a framework, I now have 4 perspectives. I can do ethics in this process manner, like identify issues, talk about them with appropriate people, and then action and iteration. But then there's also the context in which I work. If I work for a stock-owned company, then of course the short-term quarterly financial results are like the main concern. And then you will have also typically, again, the example of social media, a business model based on grabbing people's attention, holding people's attention as long as possible, a bit of polarization, a bit of fueling arguments, having people engaged, as they call it, and then selling advertisements. If that is the context in which I earn my living, in which I earn my salary, then it's more difficult to bring into practice this better nature of myself and this ethical impulse of myself. So in sociology, I think there's this typical separation, which is not a real separation, but like agency and structure. So my book is much about agency, to equip the moral agent, the individual, the software developer, the engineer, the project manager to integrate ethics into the project. But there's also structure, the company in which you work, the way that projects are managed, the way you're expected to deliver results that help to create short-term financial benefits, for example. And in the book, there's four, in the middle of the book are four chapters with four main ethical perspectives. And each of these chapters starts with a bit of fiction, which I had lots of fun writing it. So like a theater play or a film script, four people in a room typically doing a project management review meeting, something. And then it's talking about deadlines, it's talking about quality, it's talking about different functions, the legal person, the user interface person, the client. And I think by that way, I try to, pull in some of the reality of doing your work in a project, in a company, and then also showing how sometimes, hopefully often, this inclination to do good stays alive.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I'm thinking the example you brought, like when you're in an environment where it's the same thing of the definition of better. Like when sometimes people say, "Well, I want to do better," I'm like, "Better than what? What's your parameter? What are you confronting? What are you comparing better with?" There is not a better in general. It's better again if your goal is to, as a company, is to make money, sell more things, sell advertising. That could be your better. But from a societal perspective, yeah, sure, you create jobs, you create economy, you create sell, but are you really making society better? So I know that's one of your goal, to kind of like look at technology as a tool that can help humanity to be more fair and
and I like very much the way that you put it. Indeed, like even a simple word like better in what sense, better for whom. I have a chapter in the book that deals with value, and then I play with value in the sense of economic value, business model wise, but also value in the sense of helping people to live the good life in terms of well-being. And I also noticed that increasingly governments are going like beyond GDP, so your gross domestic product, as a measure for well-being is like, it's not as relevant anymore, because now we need to pay attention to the limits to growth. Now we need to pay attention to sustainable growth or sustainable development. And then so it's a way, indeed, like you're saying, better, create value, economic value or well-being value, or what sense and for whom is always good questions to ask.
Yeah, and I think that when technology, maybe I like always to look back and then to look forward, and I think like when technology wasn't, at least the computer technology, the digital technology wasn't so pervasive, we didn't really worry too much, because I don't know, maybe it was more of an entertainment, the technology, or something that you use in a specific environment like manufacture. Or maybe I'm thinking, I can think technology as a cassette tape, or you're from the Netherlands, so I know it was invented there. But a radio, or that was technology, but it wasn't so like what kind of arm could have done. The moment that we put that on the internet, and then it become everybody's phone, social media, I mean, the game became a lot more complex to play.
Yeah, totally agree. Historians of technology will possibly be able to argue like the radio was big. It helped to spread the news. It enabled people to mobilize people for good and for bad. And television was big because it was, I think, an increase in hours spent per day at a screen. Yeah, but definitely the internet as well, and all things digital and all things online. It's like it's nice sometimes to have an historical perspective. Like, who would have guessed that we're now all carrying all the time in our pockets, in our hands, often with our necks curled to watch the screen, even on the bike. And from the Netherlands, of course. It's in a sense, it's crazy. We have this powerful tools and what are we doing with it? Scrolling through Facebook? Really?
Right.
Explain that to
Yes.
me. Why?
That's my question too. It's like you have such a huge power there, and we're using so little, if any, and it's more of an entertainment than a power. I mean, look at again, generative AI. I mean, I like to play and I use Chat GPT. I use Mid Journey to create images. I mean, it's liberating from a creative perspective. I understand it comes with consequences, but uh, experimenting with it and see if you do a better job, you get inspired.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that it will. Yeah.
Hey,
So
Marco,
what is your thoughts on the future? Let's
yeah,
get there before we end. I'm curious. What's your
yeah.
vision after you wrote this book?
My vision for the future is that the people involved in the creation and deployment of technologies become better in integrating ethics, which will hopefully, in their projects, which will then hopefully lead to products and services and apps that better enable people to live well together. And that's allusion to the book I plan to write next. Hey,
All right.
yeah.
Give us a preview. What is the book?
That was the preview. Yeah, very
That
much.
was pretty much
No,
it.
no. What I can maybe do is even briefly discuss the 4 ethical perspectives that I like at the center of the book, and then I can answer this question more.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah. So I go back to several ethical perspectives that are commonly used, also in the context of technology. First one, I think it's very much accessible to people with technology or with economics backgrounds, is consequentialism. It seemingly simply looks at the potential pluses and minuses of the technology that you're working on. So let's take ChatGPT as an example. On the plus side, it helps people with creating better text, better vocabulary, better grammar. I can become a better writer, more creative writer if I use it correctly, like not slavishly, but like as a tool. On the downside, maybe people lose their jobs because you need less workers if they can use a powerful tool like ChatGPT. Consequentialism also enables you to look at the pluses and minuses, how they are in a larger system. Like the creation of ChatGPT required lots of workers in Kenya to clean up texts, to moderate, to do this and that, and that was obviously not always pleasant work, labor conditions not optimal, etc. So lots of the costs are done, transferred to a country like Kenya, to the workers over there. So that's also how large you take your pluses and minuses analysis, and then how the pluses and minuses are distributed. So the pluses and minuses are simple, but not as simple if you do this systems analysis and this distribution. The second one is duty ethics, and people with a background in law will recognize that it has lots to do with obligations and also with rights, often also with human rights. And that perspective puts center stage human dignity and human autonomy. And that perspective looks at, hey, this company that is creating something, ChatGPT, like what obligations does it have? And strangely, in the digital industry, it's a bit lacking of obligations. Suppose you were a pharmaceutics company or a food or drinks company, you have lots of rules to comply to. You must do this test, and only then can you put it to the market. But algorithms, you just put them online and they're good. And that's silly in a way. So luckily the European Union is doing lots of legislation that have also an impact outside of the EU. GDPR, the upcoming AI Act. So that's an important second ethical perspective, to look at duties and also rights. If we look again at ChatGPT, there are now authors suing OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, for infringing upon their copyrights, because you mentioned it before, they harvest, the whole of Wikipedia, lots of books, lots of the internet, and also copyrighted books. And sometimes you can really recognize if you ask for some text output in the style of an author, or with your images producing generative AI in the style of some illustrator or photographer, it is almost or for sure and infringing upon their copyrights and other rights, privacy as well. Third one, to keep it shorter, is relational ethics, and that also I use it as an umbrella term for several ethical approaches that are a reaction to the first and the second ethical perspective, because consequentialism of Jeremy Bentham, for example, and duty ethics of Immanuel Kant, for example, were very much products of the European Enlightenment. And assumptions and ambitions had to do with rationality, independence, autonomy, taken often to the extreme, as if everything needs to be objective and rational and autonomous. And a relational ethics is a critique on that. Like it says, we're all interdependent. There needs to be justice, but there also needs to be care, and that justice and care need to go hand in hand. And that perspective of relational ethics you can use very much for all these digital technologies that have an impact on how people relate to each other, how they interact to each other. The example that I've been given a couple of times, like the fraud detection algorithm, does it then reduce the person to a number, as if that person is not a person without a face, only a number that you send a letter to, like you're a fraud? Or does relational ethics then enable you to think of a process that has much more looks to the human on the other side of the algorithm, so to say? And relational ethics also borrows from feminist critiques and from feminist ethics, because it enables you to question power and the distribution of power. It would, for example, if you take ChatGPT again, look at, hey, is it now really so that 5 US-based companies own all the large language models? That's weird. As if other languages, other cultures, other continents don't matter. That's, I think, also a plea for other cultures, other continents, other languages also working on large language models. The fourth one, Marco, and that's my favorite one, virtue ethics. It ties into what I said before, looking at technology as tools. I was very much inspired by Shannon Veller, her work, her book Technology and the Virtues. She understands technologies as tools that can either help people or hinder people to cultivate relevant virtues. And then there are several traditions that you can turn to. I turn to Aristotle's virtue ethics, and he would talk about courage and self-control and justice as key virtues. There are other virtues as well, like creativity, curiosity, civility, honesty. I think I have 15 or so in the book that I go into some detail. And then again, look at ChatGPT. Does it empower me as a user to become more creative? Yeah, if I use it correctly, it does. And then virtue ethics has to do with finding an appropriate way of using this technology, like not too slavishly, but to have the appropriate mean, as Aristotle would say. And finally, virtue ethics is, I think, very much suitable for professionals and for professional ethics, because you can also turn around this virtue ethics question and ask yourself, as a programmer, as a software developer, as a project manager, what virtues do I need if I work in this project with this algorithm? I need to cultivate within myself justice and fairness and honesty. If I'm working on an algorithm that is hopefully also contributing to justice and honesty. And now, to come back to your question, my next book will put relational ethics and virtue ethics center stage, how we can use technologies to better relate to each other and to live the good life better. So how we can live well together.
Wow, I enjoy very much this.
That was my lecture of 10 minutes. Sorry for that, Marco.
No. I'm sure that the audience has been enjoying. I did. I mean, I love all these things that you mentioned. I'm relatively familiar with, some of philosopher that I have studied in the past, and I love how, for a moment, I'm like, I had to remind myself we're talking about technology and not philosophy and virtues, because all these that you said, they do apply, yes, in technology, but they do apply in everything else that we do, right? So, are we doing the right thing, and what is the right thing? And I have to say that anything you were mentioning right now, I'm just in that mindset of zooming in and zooming out. It really is, it's functioning in my head almost like a zoom of a camera. And I'm kind of like, yeah, you can look at this in the detail, but you can look at this in the big picture, and you need both. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Like the social media app example again, but I can think of other examples as well later on. The business model on a macro scale is often holding and grabbing and monetizing people's attention. How does it do that in the user interface? Well, with beeps and with flashes and with your endless scroll through the timeline. So they hang together, the details in the user interface and the larger societal aspects, implications.
Yeah, and the mind manipulation, the mental addiction that you create by doing that. Maybe in the big picture you don't see it because you're not getting that close. But when you go there, you're like, yeah, that's affecting my everyday life. All these beeps and it's like the Pavlov bell, right? It's you become part of that tool, and that's definitely not a good way to use it. But anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it'd be an interesting book, the next one that you write as well. But for now, we were talking about this one. I'm sure that you gave a lot of example, but there's much more in the book. So I want to remind people that the link to the book and the link to all that your social media, your website, the book website will be in the notes for this podcast. I invite people to get in touch with you, to read the book, of course, to subscribe to Redefining Society Podcast, and stay tuned for many more conversations like this. So, Marc, thank you so much for your participation. I really enjoyed this conversation. And
thank you.
Yeah, come back when you have the next book, anytime.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye, Marc. Bye, everybody. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Devo unlocks the full value of machine data for the world's most instrumented enterprises. The Devo Data Analytics Platform addresses the explosion in volume of machine data and the crushing demands of algorithms and automation. Learn more at devo.com. BugCrowd's award-winning platform combines actionable contextual intelligence with the skill and experience of the world's most elite hackers to help leading organizations identify and fix vulnerabilities, protect customers, and make the digitally connected world a safer place. Learn more at bugcrowd.com. Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high-net-worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Society, hosted by Marco Ciappelli. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.